Sell it from the west side. Saw those huge steel silos poking up out of our roof on the right side. That's what we're standing underneath. These are the 800 barrel fermentation tanks. So those 4 batches of what it's going to take to fill one of these tanks. That first batch will go by the room we just walked by called our yeast room and get spiked with a couple thousand pounds of brewer's yeast. Those next 2 batches will go by the room and get aerated. That's the only time you want to introduce oxygen into your beer. Oxygen is one of the 3 spoilers of beer along with light and heat. But at this point in the process, the yeast need that oxygen to reproduce and make their submembranes. No oxygen, no fermentation. That would be very, very bad for us here. Then that 4th batch will just get piped by that room. It won't get touched at all. It'll just join the rest of them here in these tanks. Then after that, the yeast will soak up all that oxygen and reproduce. Like I said, about a couple thousand pounds in here on average. We're going to harvest over 10,000 pounds out. Out of that, 6,000 pounds is good yeast that we can reuse here in-house. So 1 tank can fill 3 tanks, can fill 9 tanks. We couldn't possibly keep up with all that. We harvest over 300,000 pounds of yeast out of the cellar every week, every 7 days. 50,000 pounds of that we do reuse here in-house or repitch in the next tank. For lagers, about 7 generations. For ales, about 20 to 25 generations. Then the other 250,000 pounds tossed in with the spent grain for that cattle feed. Maybe a little secondary fermentation in the spent grain cellar, probably why we have such happy California cows. But again, that's just my opinion. Then after that, those yeast cells will wake up and say it's dinner time. They're going to start chopping all those sugar molecules, turning them into my favorite part of the beer, the alcohol or the ethanol, and the CO2, the carbon dioxide. Those 2 waste products of fermentation. When fermentation is done, it's about 5 days for ales, 14 days for lagers. That yeast will flocculate to the bottom of the tank. That's why they're in this cylindro-conical form. So the silos on the top, they're cone-shaped here on the bottom so the yeast can settle into the cone here. We can harvest it out the pipe that you see with the window there. You can see these are all the exact same plate, but just in different configurations based on what step of the process that we're at. Then after that, it's going to go through the conditioning process, also called the aging or the maturation process. 3 names for the exact same thing. It's going to develop a little bit more of its carbonation, allow it to develop those really good flavors that you want in your beer, get rid of all those secondary flavors that you don't want in your beer. That's all going to happen during that conditioning process. Then it's going to head off into filtration, that room over there in the corner. Before we talk about that though, just to give you an idea of how big these tanks really are. They're completely full of beer, like 801 there. You can see on the whiteboard it's full with the bottle style pale ale. They weigh over 260,000 pounds each. They're held up by 6-foot reinforced concrete. We haven't had one fall into anybody yet, so I think we're safe in here. Everyone looks up and starts walking backwards when I tell them that. Don't be scared. We haven't had one fall yet, so I think we're safe. Now 800 barrels. That's 1,600 kegs of beer in there. It's over 24,800 gallons. To put that in perspective, really give you an idea of how much beer that really is. I personally would have to drink over 13 and a half pints a day, every single day, for 40 years in a row to finish one of these tanks. We have 50 here on site.
Let's get started.
Like I said, we fill 3 every single day. We empty about 4 or 5 a day during the week when the bottle shop and filtration is running. Obviously not right now when our plant shut down, but when it's in full working order. Now, don't get too excited. It's not a challenge or anything. I don't want to see anybody opening up the spigots or anything. Just to give you an idea of how much beer is in there. So don't get too excited. Then it's going to head off into filtration. The first step in filtration usually sounds like a jet engine inside of a hangar here. Those are our 2 centrifuges. They're going to spin that beer, make that beer go on the carnival ride of its life. They're going to spin the beer at over 5,600 RPM. Basically, that clear beer stays in the middle. Those heavy solids are forced to the outside. Just like the gravitron, when it forces you up against the wall with that centrifugal force. Exact same idea, just force those heavy solids to the outside. It filters at about 140 gallons a minute. Then if it's a really clear beer, like pale ale, crystal wheat, it's going to go through a plate frame filter. It's a series of back-to-back paper filters that's going to get the rest of the particles 3 to 5 microns big out of that beer. If it's beer like our porter, our stout, that's not necessary. Those beers are so dark, you wouldn't be able to tell if you got it that clear in a plate frame. Once they go through a centrifuge, those are good to go. That's all the filtration those are going to get. Which one of our 5 bottle conditioned beers, which are pale ale, porter, stout, celebration, and Bigfoot, those only develop about half of the carbonation or so here in these tanks. Once they go through filtration, they'll get primed with some more sugar, repitch with a little bit more brewer's yeast, and once they're bottled, they have to sit for 2 weeks to get that bottle conditioning in there. So if you got really excited, try to pale ale off the line we're about to see, you pop it open and try it because you were so excited, then give me a funny look and say, Scott, this beer is terrible, it's totally flat. That's because it hasn't set those 14 days, so yeast can go through and eat that sugar, create that carbon dioxide as a waste product just like in fermentation, thus the other half of the carbonation in the bottle. So if you get those pale ales that has that tiny little sediment ring on the very bottom, that's from that bottle conditioning. It's totally natural. You want that in your beers to get that rest of the carbonation. So pretty cool. If it's not one of those 5, it'll head out to the bottle shop. That's where we're going to go check out now. Any questions before we head out?